Hello everyone, this is Alex, and this video is going to be about the monthly challenge, the subreddit monthly challenge for February 2017. And the theme for the challenge for that month was state machines. Let me bring it up here real fast. Yeah, the beginner challenge was to simply implement, object with a state variable, and so it'll behave differently depending on that state variable. Pretty basic stuff, if you have a platformer character, his states can be stand, walk, jump, climb, that sort of stuff. And the intermediate challenge was to make a stack-based state machine, which honestly I'm kind of gonna skip over that one because it's a little confusing when I researched it. And then even though I think I kind of got it when I actually started programming one in Gamemaker, it ended up, I don't know, I couldn't program it in a way that made sense or that made it unique. It just ended up looking like a regular state machine. I honestly didn't probably give it too or enough thought. I probably could have done something, but it was getting, I don't know, a little tedious and frustrating. And I mean, I'm just trying to make videos and trying to make games for fun. And even though obviously, game making can be hard and you should work hard and you should, you shouldn't shy away from a challenge, but I don't know. It didn't seem interesting to me, at least, to make that stack-based one. At least not the way I was thinking. In a game, I don't know. States are a big deal in a game, but I couldn't wrap my head around it, I guess. However, the expert challenge I think is really interesting. The entity component system is pretty interesting when you read about it, and then when you actually try to implement one, you realized how powerful and how useful this kind of system is. It immediately reminds me of Unity, another game engine very popular, which, I mean, it's flat out totally uses this kind of thing. You create an object and you attach different components, they even call them components, to that object to give it its behavior, to give it its, to build it, right? You add pieces to it. And not totally unlike Gamemaker, it's just that Gamemaker isn't as obvious about it. But in Gamemaker, it's the same thing. You create an object and you apply scripts to it, and those scripts are adding functionality to your game. It's just that in this, at least in my the game that I made for this, I'm making it very obvious and very in your face that I have an empty vessel, basically, of an object, and I'm giving it these components. And then the components, dictate directly what that object can do. So let me go ahead and just run the game real fast. It's a little overhead, top-down view tank-like game. Where is it? There it is. So there it is. So yeah, this first room is showing off the first beginner challenge, which is just a simple state machine variable. I have a tank and I have a target, and right now its state is idle, which means it's just standing there. It doesn't have a target. It doesn't have a move target or a fire target or nothing. It's literally just sitting there. However, if I change its state to patrol, it chooses a random corner in the room and moves towards it. And that's pretty much it. It sets its move target basically to a random corner, and it just cycles through it. When it gets to its target, it chooses a new target. It doesn't care about the target or the bullseye. It just keeps moving. If I change its state to attack, it'll basically look at a target and then fire at it. Fairly basic stuff. When we look at the code, you'll see what's going on exactly. But yeah, I have 4 states. The next state being tackle, which basically means it's setting its target location to the target, to the bullseye. So it's just moving automatically to each one. Obviously, there's no input in this. It's all automatic. I'm not touching anything, it automatically goes to there. If I switch it back to idle, it stops. Switch it back to patrol, it goes back to a corner. Switch it back to attack and it'll shoot. And if we go into the code, you'll see I have a tank object here. And if we go into the step event, you'll see, you can clearly see the states and how I've constructed the object. It's a simple switch, and it just looks to see what state am I in, what's the value of my state variable. If I'm in idle, then I'm running the idle script. Patrol, I'm running the patrol scripts, which is to choose a target and then go to it. The attack, again, choose a target and fire, and the tackle is choose a target and go to it. We're using some scripts here and there because obviously some behavior is repeated, so you never want to code the same thing twice. You want to move it into a script so you can reuse it, and that's all it is really. Scripts are all fairly basic, changing image angles, determining targets, distance to target and whatnot, and that's all it is, right? The state machine handles what the behavior is directly. All the code is technically in the object, in the tank object. It's not depending on anything else. It's just very very specifically coded, if that makes any sense. All the code is for the tank and for the tank alone. However, for the entity component system, that's a different story, right? So let's move into that room in which it's empty and I can place a target wherever I want. Those are just targets like before. And now I'm going to create basically an empty object right there. It starts off at a random angle, but that's all it is. It's just an empty object. It has no behavior. In fact, let's go ahead and look at it in the code. I call it an entity. And if we go into the creative code, there's nothing in there. There's no code in there dictating any kind of behavior at the start. However, if I give it a component, in this case E, which stands for engine, basically, I'm gonna go ahead and click on it and I'm gonna give it the engine. So now it's automatically moving forward and backwards. When it hits the edge of the room, it just bounces. And that's all it is. The engine makes it move. I'm giving it the ability to move is all it is. But that's it. The next thing I have, the next component I created is the R, which is a radar. Radar is gonna make it, detect a target. So if I click it, now it can actually, detect a target. And since it can move, it's gonna move towards it. And the targets just automatically, get destroyed when the entity touches it. If we go ahead and restart this and create another entity and give it the radar, you'll see that I didn't really notice there, but it turns, right? It turns toward the target, but since it doesn't have engine, it can't move toward it, right? So if we add an engine to it, then it'll go towards it, right? So that's kind of one of the main things about the entity systems. The object itself is, an empty object, and the components, they don't depend on one another. They don't require other components to work, at least not normally. That's kind of the spirit of the whole system. You create these separate components, which you make them in a way so that they're self-sufficient, and you make them in a way so that they interact, and their cumulative behavior is what makes your object, right? I want a tank that can move and shoot stuff. Okay, well, we give it one ability to move, and then an ability to turn, and then an ability to shoot, and it's the sum of those abilities that adds up to the tank. I'm probably rambling and not making much sense, but I think it's just conceptually really interesting. Another component that I made is a turret. Oh, whoops. Turret is F. So if I give it the turret ability, now it can shoot. So it can move, turn towards a bullseye, and also shoot. Let's go ahead and restart this. Let's make a target here. If we give an empty entity a turret, it's just gonna shoot, you know, every 60 frames when it's off cooldown, and that's all it is, right? There's nothing else it can do. If I give it the radar, now you can turn and shoot at the targets because it has a turret component attached. And I don't know, I just kind of found that interesting. It's almost like making an AI. There's no AI really. No, there's no decision making. Yet it's kind of a poor man's or an alternate way to make AI. I don't know. It feels like it's like an AI type system, because you can make different objects and you simply attach different components to them, and they behave differently. It's obvious that they behave differently, but it's interesting. Like if I had a bunch of different components and a bunch of different possible behaviors, you're gonna end up with an object that behaves completely that wasn't predicted. It's like you're creating a brand new object that you didn't even think about or plan about. It just happened, right? The different combinations of these components of these abilities leads to different and unexpected behavior sometimes. And I don't know, I just think that's cool. I find it fascinating just to make a bunch of these guys and have them wander around. And like I said, even though there's no scripting on how they should behave in terms of AI, they're simply doing exactly what they're told, but giving them variable abilities because they have a variable set of components leads to this interesting and different behavior. So yeah, I probably didn't make any sense and all that, but that's how it is. Let's look at the code again a little here. The entity, like I said, the entity starts off with nothing. I have a component UI, which basically means, or actually it's, yeah, the entity UI. On a hotkey, I can determine what component I want to, set to the mouse. And when I click on a mouse, on an entity, an empty entity, I'm simply, giving that component to. Actually, that's totally wrong. I'm not giving the component. All I'm doing is actually passing that entity's ID to a controller object, right? So actually I have a component control over here, which initializes for 3 lists. The list, each list holds which objects are subscribed to it, right? So if I click on an entity when I have the engine cursor on, that means that entity is now subscribed to the engine controller, and the engine controller then controls obviously all the entities that have an engine component, right? So it goes through this list and it simply runs the the component engine script on all the objects in its list, which is about moving. Obviously the component for radar is going to have them turn, and then the turret one's going to have them all fire, right? So really it's the controller that does everything. The component controller, the object itself remains oblivious to what it can do, because it's these components that actually handle everything. So yeah, again, rambling, not making much sense, but I really hope you guys try to do this challenge because you're gonna learn something guaranteed. I promise you. I've been working with Gamemaker forever, since like version 6 or whatever, and I've never actively tried to make this type of system. And it kind of opens up a whole new world of what you can do. It more clearly opens up other game types that you can work on that you didn't even consider before, just because of this different way of making an object. Instead of just overloading one object with all this stuff. Oh, look, my character can do this and that and this and that. Okay, well, instead of thinking it like like that, you think about the actual actions that an object can do, and you code the actions separately in a vacuum almost, and then you simply apply those functions, those actions to your object, and then if you do it right, you can apply it to another object. So you could spend all day making your perfect character, right, in the old-fashioned way, or you can make these components and apply them to multiple things. You can apply it to a boss object. So now that boss has the same abilities that the character does, and you didn't have to code a boss specifically, right? You just gave it a set of skills that you had already made. So again, it leads to more interesting objects at the end of the day, because now you can make it's easier and quicker to make an interesting object with lots of different abilities. As opposed to coding an object specifically with its own abilities and its own stuff. And if you want to change how it does something, you change that specific object, and nothing else gets affected, which is fine. But what if you want to affect all your objects, or if you want to have a bunch of different interesting actions and apply them to different objects? It's really cool stuff. Really cool stuff. Anyways, that's the video. I really maybe should have planned what I was gonna say, but I hope you guys, like I said, do this challenge. It's not the easiest one, but you're gonna learn a lot more from this one than in previous ones. I promise. So thanks for watching, and I will see you guys later.